12, and last week we were talking about the preamble of today's lesson is the opening verses in Hebrews chapter 12. He says, therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let's lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares or besets us. And I have underlined this passage because it's important. Let us run with endurance the race that's set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. And he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Here's the take-home message from that. We look for Jesus to be an example. And what exactly did he do? He started the faithful process of what God wanted him to do. He endured that as one would a race. He started it and then he finished it. And then he sat down at the right hand of God, a place of honor. He started, he endured, he finished. That's how you please God. In that, it mentions that he despised the shame. That's the shame of the cross. The scriptures say, cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. It's not a pleasant, but nobody says of their child, boy, I hope he goes to the electric chair. That would be a proud moment in my life. Nobody says that of their child, because execution, for lack of a better way to put it, execution implies something. It implies guilt. It's a repulsive thing. It implies that the nature, I'm talking about the nature of the individual who has been executed, is suspect and deserved of that kind of treatment. Jesus was none of those things, but he didn't concern himself with that. He readily went to the cross on our behalf. And that's where we want to pick up today's lesson. So let's go a little further here. We'll look in Hebrews in the 12th chapter. We're going to begin in verse 3. Are you ready? We're going to move rather rapidly because I was not very expeditious next week, and we only have one more lesson after this one. Here we go. For consider him, that's Jesus. Look to him, who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. You think you're going to go through life without somebody pushing back at your faith? That's not going to happen. You are going to encounter some resistance from the world. It will be unpleasant. It may discourage you. That's what he's saying. You look at Jesus. He went to the cross. He finished. And then he sat down at the right hand of God. He said, you haven't yet resisted unto blood. Nobody took your life. Nobody spilled your blood. Striving against sin. Or have you forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons? This is a quote. It's a quote from Proverbs. We'll look at it in just a moment. But kind of dissect this out for just a moment. The quote says this, my son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord. Now, Mark spoke last week in his lesson, if you remember, about chastisement. Chastisement is not punishment. It's discipline. It's a directive. It may accompany punishment if sin is involved, but principally it is a way of discipline. Let me say it this way. When you were little, maybe your dad pulled you out of traffic. He wasn't mad at you. He was what? He was in love trying to save you from something. If you did it again, you might have gotten a spanking. I don't know. But it's still chastisement. Mother didn't pull your hand from the hot stove because she was punishing you. She did that because she loves you. It might have been forceful. She may have said things to you in a way that you didn't like. But the message got across, you shouldn't do those things. It's not good for you. So keep that in mind as you're reading this passage. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. With growth comes the impertinent and sometimes unpleasant circumstance of having hard things said or done to you for your good. That's what Solomon was trying to get across to his son when he originally penned these words. And that comes from Proverbs in the 3rd chapter, verses 11 through 12. Now the question is, what sort of chastisement is he talking about? Well, let's go a little further and we'll begin to see that if you endure chastening, chastisement, if you endure that, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? With parenthood comes that responsibility. And with love is the eventual need to stand in the breach between something that your child, whom you love, wants to do, and you know is not good for them, and this idea of chastening. All right? Listen. We'll skip forward just a little bit. We had human fathers who corrected us. We paid them respect. We've established that. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live, our spiritual Father? He wants life for us. And in order for that to happen, he must chastise us. He must discipline. He must give us directives. Are you with me? Now listen to this. Listen. Pay close attention. Indeed, for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. With holiness comes the goal, which is salvation. Without such, none of us will ever be saved. We must be a holy people. We must be. It's important what we think. It's important what we say. It's important what we do. And so it is that he's directing us in how we may accomplish that. Now, nevertheless, afterwards, after the chastisement, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those whom have been trained by it. We still haven't answered the question of what chastisement is. But on the other side of it comes the peaceable fruit of righteousness. All right. Now we're going to learn how God chastises us with respect to what he's saying here in Hebrews. Because this isn't a generic thing that he's talking about. He's talking about something specific. Here's what he's talking. Therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Again, that theme of a race. If you injure yourself along the course of a race, you have to be careful. Look at what he says again. Strengthen your hands which hang down. Don't be so feeble. And your feeble knees. Make straight paths. That's an interesting term used in lots of places in Scripture. You heard it referred to of John. Making straight paths for the Lord. Again, it's like running a race. You want to prepare the way before you. You want to look for the right path so that you don't stumble, so that you don't injure yourself. So what injuries you have suffered don't turn into circumstances whereby you must forego the race, whereby you must stop. You want to strengthen yourself during the race. And if those parts are injured, you want to be careful so that you don't dislocate them. I don't know about you, but I've got a feeling that if I were dislocated in my joints during a race, that'd be pretty much the end of it. Maybe you can run a race with dislocated joints, but I don't think I could. Pursue peace with all people. What's that got to do with this? Have you thought about it?
Pursuing peace avoids sin.
Well, develop that thought for me. I say develop that thought for me. You say avoid sin.
You're keeping your eye on God, and you have been trained, and you are in this race. You want to do what He's instructed you to do, and occasionally, I think, or maybe more often,
Well,
when you get off course, be corrected.
what specifically would get you off course, I guess is what I'm saying. How so? How is he chastising us? You remember last week in Mark's lesson again, he was talking about this. He said sometimes God uses bad circumstances and maybe even bad people to discipline us back to the course on which we should be. Here's what he said. I'll skip this. I'm going to run out of time. Larry gets mad when I go over. Looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God. The grace of God. Now, we use that term in multiple sermons in lots of different ways over the last several weeks because we've kind of been studying that. The grace of which we may fall short are the words of the gospel. The grace that he's referring here is the word of God that instructs us towards the goal, towards that reward. He says, be careful lest any of you fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble. A root of bitterness. I'll just tell you what I'm thinking rather than begging the question. It's the outside world. It's other people. It's the world we live in. God uses those circumstances to discipline us. When we meet resistance from other people with respect to our Christian life, it's God's way of telling us, get your hand off that. That's bad for you. Get back on track. In some people, that can create a circumstance whereby we become bitter, hateful. God says, don't let that happen. Be peaceful with all people. On the other side of this is the peaceful fruits of righteousness. In other words, look at what he says here. Be careful lest you fall short of the glory of God, of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble. And by this many become defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau. You remember the story of Esau? Genesis 25 through Genesis 27. You remember that? He came in from the fields empty-handed. He was starving. So he claimed to the point of death, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Sounds like a great idea. Sell your birthright to Jacob. All right, now it describes him as both a fornicator and a profane person. I don't know, maybe he was sexually immoral. That's typically what that term refers to, porneo, someone, but it can also refer to someone who is sensual or just immoral in general. Israel, when they worship idols, are oftentimes referred to as fornicators. So Esau may have been that type of person. In other words, the birthright was an important thing. The eldest son was able to obtain this as a blessing from his father. That confers upon him many things of great important value. Can you think of some of them? The birthright, what did that give you? All right, that gave you a double portion of inheritance. What else did it give you? Leadership. You become the head of the clan. It's a place of honor and dignity. You determine the course of the family. That's not something to be taken lightly. Whatever the family has, you have. And so it is that Esau considered this to be a profane thing. What's that mean, a profane thing? Common, ordinary, an everyday thing. Wasn't special. Who gave him that birthright by law? God did. And so Esau took that and he said, it's not worth anything. I'll trade it for a pot of red stew and bread. And then he went on his way. Except later, he what? He wanted it back. It was too late then. Scripture says he sought it with tears. He took something noble, honorable, valuable, given to him by the Lord, and he gave it away as though it was nothing. That's the point of this. A bitterness springing up, causing trouble. Jacob and Esau always, apparently through their life, with some conflict. And then this event happens, and you see Jacob and Esau at variance until much later in life. Jacob afraid of his brother, Esau fearsome and defensive. And so much that his mother said, you need to get out of here, to Jacob. You better get out of here. Your brother's not happy. He says, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. Once you give up your faith, there comes a point where it's too what? It's too late. Did you ever think about that? For folks who sort of consider time a luxury they'll always have, did you ever think about that? That time's running out for you? Did you ever think about that? I'll correct that tomorrow. I'll start doing right whenever. That's what Esau thought. You have a gift of God. Do not discount it as something profane. That's the point of this. Listen, you have not come to the mountain. Now, this other thing that we were talking about, chastisement, is an external factor. It says there are other people who may influence you for wrong. That's God's way of chastising you. That's God's way of telling you, you got something really worthwhile. You had better get back on course, or you're not going to get it. You're going to get hurt. Now he comes to another point. Here is the second point. You haven't come to a mountain that may be touched and that burned with fire, and to blackness and darkness and tempest and the sound of a trumpet and a voice of words, so that those who heard begged that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. They couldn't endure it, what was commanded. And if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I'm exceedingly afraid and trembling. That's a reference to Exodus in the 19th chapter. You remember that event? God calling Israel to Mount Sinai. He told Moses, get your people prepared. And on the third day, I want you to assemble them at the mountain. And he gave them instructions. You remember? It said on that day they came there was thunder and lightning and thick clouds on the mountain, a loud trumpet blast. All the people of the camp tremble. Moses goes up to the mountain. While he's up there, God says, you better get down there and take care of these people. They're going to break forth and they're going to lose their lives. Because again, it matters how you respond to what God commands you to do. When he says do a certain thing, he means do it. Not your way, his way. Fearful people at the base of the mountain. Moses said to the Lord, he said, they know, you told them. He said, go down and warn the people lest any break through to the Lord, and look, and many of them perish. Also, lest the priests who come near to the Lord consecrate themselves, lest the Lord break out against them. And Moses said to the Lord, the people can't come. You yourself warned us, saying, set limits around the mountain and consecrate it. They were given instructions, do not come near this mountain. They set up a perimeter. They said if anybody comes through, stone them. Even if an animal breaks through, kill it. In the Hebrew letter, it said, you haven't come to such a circumstance as this. In the former passage, it said, you haven't suffered, not like Jesus did, not to the shedding of your blood. Men haven't been that wicked to you yet. So you need to endure. Use those circumstances as a chastisement. Now he says, remember Israel? They came to a repellent circumstance and a mountain that quaked and loud and thunderous, scary sort of things that they viewed. You haven't come to that. Instead, you've come to something that's inviting and appealing. God didn't tell you, don't come near me. I don't want to see you here. Instead, he told us something different. Here's what he said. You've come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and the church of the firstborn. The church of the firstborn, who are registered in heaven. You know how they're registered in heaven? The innumerable company of the general assembly, the church of the firstborn, who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, the spirits of men made perfect. Those are people who have already gone on. They finished. That's the point he's making. You haven't come to a worrisome, scary circumstance. You've come to an inviting, appealing circumstance. People want you to come into the church. People want you to come to heaven. People want you to be faithful. Right? All right, so here's what he says. To Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, to the sprinkling of blood that speaks better things than that of Abel. Abel's blood speaks that of faithful obedience. Jesus' blood speaks of salvation. Big difference. All right? Now, this is written principally to Hebrew Christians, but you can insert you in there anywhere and it still makes good sense. The point of the fact is, you do not receive the reward unless you're faithful to the end. The Revelation letter said, faithful unto death. I think Mark made reference to that too. So do you see the circumstance that we are the argument, the apologetics that are being used in this particular passage before we go on to the next? Anybody got a question, got a comment? Go ahead.
I think it's interesting in verse 23, he calls it the church of the firstborn.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people look at that and look at Jesus as being the firstborn. And
Right.
But I actually think in the context, it's when
Good point. There is a Hebrew word for that. I'm trying desperately not to get into this, but there is a word for that, and you're right. It is the same word used there, the firstborn. Bakor is the word. At any rate, when it is that he's talking about the church of the firstborn, it is likely that he is referring to that or those who have gone on before us. Nonetheless, the message again is, you start, you endure, you finish, then the reward. Mike, did you want to say something? Right. No question. Endurance. Key word. Listen to this. See that you don't refuse him who speaks. For if they, the example of those we were just referring to, if they didn't escape, who refused him who spoke on earth, how much more shall we escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven? A lot of people are depending upon the circumstance that they'll be special somehow. We're not special. We're the same as those people. We tend to sophisticate ourselves a little bit and think of ourselves as different than them. We're the same people that they were. We will not escape. We are tasked with the same responsibilities to be faithful. All right. Whose voice then shook the earth. Can you imagine what a terrifying circumstance that would be to be in that audience on that day in Exodus 19 at the foot of that mountain and to hear those thunderous claps and to actually hear the words that the Lord are speaking to you, so much so that afterwards they came to Moses and said, "Don't let God speak to us anymore. We cannot endure it. You tell us what he said." That's right. The preacher today said, "Be bold." When David was talking about that, it sort of does put us at the foot of that mountain. You have to be bold. That's true. What a great segue from the lesson. God said this, and he promised it. This sounds very much to me like Haggai in the 2nd chapter. Here's what he said. "Yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven." So I'm going to ask you up front before I read the rest of this, what does he mean by he's shaking something on earth and also in heaven? And here's what the rest of that passage said. Yet once more indicates the removal of those things which are being shaken. Yet once more. Quoting the quote. The removal of those things that are being shaken, as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. So what's being shaken and removed? What do you think? Brother Royalty says lies are being shaken and removed. The truth remains. Something's being disposed of that is impermanent, temporary, and being replaced with something that endures. What is that? It's the Jewish system. True. I am going to remove the old, which is the Jewish system, the law of Moses, and the Jewish system. I'm replacing it with something that endures. It's going to shake not only earth, but heaven. He is establishing a new order that will endure. Not just the church, but the transcendence of the church into heaven. Again, you will not go to heaven without being a faithful Christian and a member of the church. You will not go. That's what he's saying. There is no other way. I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. There is no other way, Jesus said. All right, yet once more indicates the removal of those things. Again, remember, he's speaking to Hebrew Christians. He says, therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, it's the kingdom. You remember when Brother Longstreth was here, he was talking about the nature of the kingdom. It could be something here on earth, that's the church, but it also is something in heaven. It's being delivered up to the Lord in the last days, and there we will be forever with him. Let us have grace. Again, that word grace comes up. This has a different meaning. I would hesitate to use the Greek because I know nothing about Greek, but I did look it up. This particular word, grace, means thankfulness. Let us have thanksgiving, thankfulness, by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. In other words, he says, since you are receiving this kingdom, it is a blessed privilege. Be thankful for it. Be appreciative for the things that you're going through to get there. Do not give your heritage away like Esau did. Do not do those things and just treat it as something profane. It's not common. What awaits you in heaven is special. It's particularly valuable. And the contradistinctive thing about this is what happens when you do give that blessing away. What awaits you is God, who is a consuming fire. He's the judge. All right. Now, I want to introduce chapter 13 while we've got time, but does anybody have a question, a comment, anything that they want to say, anything that bears saying at this time? Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
The commentaries I saw that made a really good point about all this towards the end here in comparing the way that God spoke to the people, Moses, people at that time, Mount Sinai. In fact, he doesn't speak to us that way now. Today, he speaks to us through grace, through mercy, through invitation, through appeal, through warnings, and we need to take heed to all of those things.
True, John. Well put. Now, when you start in chapter 13, and we'll just give you some of the beginnings of it, to some people, this looks like a laundry list of things left over. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That last verse is one of the serious verses in the Bible.
You better know it.
Because as the church has evolved, we look at it as, oh, I don't want to step on anybody's toes, or I don't want to do this. We are dealing with the same God of Exodus, Genesis, all of it, and it is frightening. You know, we talked even earlier in Hebrews about, Noah and how exact the specifications had to be for
Terrifying.
and it's frightening to think that we're dealing with the same God, we make a change, his message never has.
Very true. That's a good way to put it. There are only two alternatives here. One is blessings in heaven, the other is the curse of God. I don't know about you, but I don't like that second option. Doesn't sound very good. Go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Well, we tend to focus, New Testament Christians, we like to say, perfect love casts out fear.
Yeah,
But if you don't have that perfect love for God, you better fear.
that's right. The Roman letter puts it this way: behold the goodness and severity of God. Remember that. All right. Now, I want to introduce you to chapter 13. I realize I kind of rushed through this thing today. I did that purposefully. Next week, we'll take greater care, but I want to introduce something to you. The beginnings of chapter 13 seem to some people to look like a laundry list of things that he wants to bring up at the last minute. That is not true. What he's doing is, knowing the lessons of chastisement, let me tell you something about the course of your life. He's picking up on practical things that affect you with reference to the time that those people lived in, and us as well, to some degree, that might challenge their faith. Here's what he says: let brotherly love continue, dealing one with another in the church and with other people, so that a root of bitterness does not spring up and disqualify us. Like you said in chapter 12, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by doing so, some have unwittingly entertained angels. I believe those are messengers of God, people. I don't think that's necessarily celestial beings. Some people believe that. That's your prerogative. But I think what he's saying is, in troubling times, when you're outnumbered, and that's the environment they lived in. They'd left Judaism and entered a world where they were shunned. He said, don't stop entertaining. What he means by that is, don't don't suspend hospitality. You may be helping somebody, a messenger of God in particular. Right? All right. Then he says, remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are also in the body also. That's obvious. Then he says, marriage is honorable and all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Let your conduct be without covetousness. In other words, all the things that you are responsible for doing on an ordinary daily basis that pleases God, keep doing them. Even though you're living in a circumstance that makes it difficult sometimes to be that way, be righteous. Do the right thing. Okay? It's not a laundry list of leftover things. It's a conduct of life that he wants to impress upon them they must continue to do in view of what he's just said. You see what I mean? All right. So he says, let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. Earlier in the letter, he said, you took joyfully the spoiling of your goods. You lost everything you had just by becoming a Christian. Here he says, don't be covetous. Be thankful for what you have. Be happy for what you have. All right? For he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you, so we may what? As David said, so we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? No matter what happens on this earth, whether we lose everything, whether war comes to us, you can fill in the blanks, whether some terrible, awful circumstance comes our way in this life, on this earth, what remains for us? It's the hope of heaven, isn't it? Exceedingly, abundantly more valuable than anything you carry in your pocket right now or in your bank account. I'm not saying I would enjoy those things if that happened to me, but even if they stripped of everything that we have, we still have the hope of heaven. You want to give that away for a pot of red stew? You go ahead and do that. Me? I'm going to heaven. Don't know about you, but that's where I'm going. All right. Next week when we pick this up, you are going to see something that hopefully, in preparation for this moment, This is what I've been talking about for weeks and why I did what I did last week, that impresses upon you what it is that's so important about these coming verses. That'll be the end of the line for us. Don't miss it. Thank you.